to some of you. Right now, the first thing we're going to do is we want to talk about the activities that you did this morning and find out from at least a few groups, what data question you looked at with the practice survey.
Samala Gondo de Les, and it rang as a tati carins, and a tirin shopa chisu with Cheguchi Trib, your watch Cheguchi Trib, Tene, Tetan Drebi Gita, Susu Tang two town Drebi, Joachi Tang Joati Tang de, and a Telaya, a Tirichi Pabi or what, or Teta Corchi, ne Kishigin standard Tinane and Setsula, a Jonda Chivi Caps, and a Kange Corridor, which has Titocola to the chains.
And if you were able to make a pivot table, we will look at that all together. And if you were able to make a graph, we're going to look at that all together.
The Katie Charan get a case of pivot tables, the pivot tables, and the non to Dodozo Shajugi, remove tabdiches with the remove tabdit is where Rabina and also Telanyam Patagians and Katie Chela Charangirwat and the remove tabdits what they shisha de tela yet Hirila Pavia Chonyana, also Telanyam Patagian.
And if things didn't work, that's okay. We can find out what you tried to do and then see if we can do it together.
Get it to the data chimasum by Bana, and I so get to Karichinam do telata, and de la Yanko top down the Sugura, the Timditi Yoach, the Tapshi Karita and do data against.
So I'll just give you a few minutes in case you're not ready for in your groups to make sure that on whatever laptop you have that you have the spreadsheet up where you tried to analyze some data this morning.
That get the young to try to make a Kamakachi Nangains, the Barotelaches to Shopa, and Jantu Egypt, the Peshatanju, Jantu remove your and it a young Susuget and the Lolegan Layatome by Bana, the Lolegan Yaton Chikachiro chase.
And then I'm just going to pick some group numbers at random and I'll put your spreadsheet up on the screen so that we can all see it.
That and the any Rukati, Megani, Rukachi, Dam Rukati, Dambatan, Rukategi, any Tantugu removed it, what, and then any Chitsula, and then they like teaching to a new the punk pretension to a thing or like a church, and then as we science.
So you all get ready, and then when you're ready, we'll start with group 3.
And just started now, Chase started to Batang also request some bunny goods against.
So group 3, whenever you're ready, can you tell me sort of what spreadsheet you did some basic data analysis in so I can show it to everyone?
Request some ballatari in manages to din on it, and it's trying to remove your what they and a Kangich Pechatai teach you Mutuchiro chase, teach you by none did done its Hamala tankins.
Page. Our file is that practice survey. Yep. And then inside that, we have created a sheet called Laughing Buddha Group.
One second here. Oh, Laughing Buddha Group.
Yeah, that one.
Okay, can you tell us what your question was?
So our question is like, is happiness related to the minutes of sleep during daytime?
Okay.
So we have tried to find a correlation between the minutes of sleep during daytime and the happiness felt over the past 2 weeks.
Okay, let me this go away so we can see it. So here's your graph.
Yeah.
And can you tell us why you picked this kind of graph?
So the main idea of us picking this topic is like it's very much relevant to the topic that we have chosen. Our topic is related to the sleep during daytime and this effect on the emotions and daily routine.
Okay.
So I think that graph is pretty much relevant to the topic that we have chosen. So we have picked this graph and the question. So if you look at the graph, we have tried to find a correlation between two variables. That is the happiness and the hours and minutes of sleep during daytime.
Okay.
So through this graph, we have observed that we have picked this one, two values like count of minutes of sleep and average amount of sleep. And through that, we have found that the person's having this one, longer period of sleep during daytime has felt happiness more than those who have not slept that much during daytime.
Okay, and just so that everybody understands sort of where those data in the graph, which color of bars is that?
So in that one, the red color signifies the average amount of sleep. So if you look at the two variables, along the x-axis we have the happiness felt over the past 2 weeks, and along the y-axis we have the minutes of sleep during the daytime. So if you look at the graph, you can obviously see that the average amount of sleep decreases with the increases in the happiness felt over the past 2 weeks.
Okay, so this is excellent. Can you explain to people, or do you understand sort of what the blue bars represent?
The blue bar represents the count of the minutes of the sleep.
So I think, hold on, let me look.
In values, we have taken counter and average, both of them.
Right.
So if you want to find only the average value, we can delete the counter value from the counter, this one, from the values.
Yeah, so how many, 18, yeah, so I think the count, the blue ones are confusing, and I will explain why.
Yeah.
Dawa, do you want to translate to explain what we're looking at?
And did you see when I request some back because it's so the calendar, the calendar, Ninko, Niquia, Carmana, a general Quiateta, and the key said, Dicky, so to say, or take a parola draw you may tea, need Deshi Javis, to Attila Lanjaba, instead of the Capsivana, need Tigi Nane, Kusugita, and Jutomasna, Telaya, Jutonta Nire, Niganania, Chilaya, Chaki, Nisusha, that day like a graph na power taking one botege, and it made Tadilla Kama. Katsula ni kusha sa teche ani de na la marpuch to de yang ko chanyom ge kama katsula ni kusha sa te de to ani te kapsa ko ge jont te ge gang la ya 아니 jonte ganglaya 아니 아니 kuya gitu dice thete ganglaya 아니 karsa thete ganglaya 아니 tantrani girilaya tachi kipudo katso sorsong se tiradwa nestambala 아니 디 ganene ngoto tichi yes ra tanda de kapso kusugi dan jutang tin juchite mando ni re yan dan ni re ina chikna la ya tumba ni yong ko ta tanda de kapso ne gela kar sung do sena de na la ya ane nga chu na ri tu ko sha yo res wa na ri tu ko sha yo ba kan shla na ri te na la ya na re ngombu chu ko sha yo wa na ri ngombu ko ba de ane this go nyo ko ra chu swa ane this tambala milang go thong chi ni ro chu this tambala yati kari ni gi jin senti de shi jagins yes.
All right, so the red is very interesting because, as you said, it suggests that those people who report, and especially the person who reported not feeling happy, is getting less sleep during the day.
Ta tanda dus tabai bana ro tanda nga su ge na re mapo de la tabai bana ani ningkong ro ta ningkong karsa 다 기부천에 자원에 조금 더 자원에 맞춰서 줘라 기부 자원에 조금도 세 때라야 니마 관이 용하라고.
So you can see that because this red bar on the right is lower in terms of minutes of sleep than those people who are getting a lot of sleep or a little sleep.
네 단다 때라야 자원에 맞춰서 때긴 리게 도세데 네 현다로 망부 정송사 당 디스 정송사 때리
the blue bars, I think, represents the number of people who reported being not happy at all, happy a lot, or happy a little.
단다게 오라 지요로 가서 ngombu 지요로 ngombu ti ani ngarang samse bana ne 지가 karsa kore ta zaone chongma song kipu zaone chongma song mambu chongson chongsum chongsong se ni gi mi gi tambor katsu chi chi sa tin sa res
and that's because the count A, all it can do is count the number of cells with a particular answer.
tan de kapsa de la ya ti kachin la ba ina count A se sa chi to ti ka la go la na ani 단다게 다 티르게 다 쿠카티티나라 유에피게 지 렌자 조라 렌테 아니 총참세 렌테 카츠치레샤세 티게 정가티 마시자트 말이스.
So let's see if this is true. I'm going to look at the original data and there should be one person who said that they were not happy at all.
땅 아츠디 디둠데 타기 인스타에 가와타기 인세나 아니 델라타기 인스타 가수게 rimu tampochi tantu rimu thomagi rimu data de ani chawni ki pucho ma song se de la ya chawni chong ma song se ge ani len janye mi kan sing dum do tagins.
Let's see. Happy, there it is. Okay, here's happy, and we see one answer for not at all. And that's the only one. So yes, that's counting the number of people who said they were happy a little bit, a lot, or not at all.
Dati tare shais ro tanda ge tanga chi go rashi ta chi ni tanda ne shi to te kare du sena ani kipo cha ni chongson chongma so ma bo chongson se ni ge ani sanken mi ka chu tu se te ge tanga re shas.
So what that means is the blue bar actually represents the sample size for these three groups.
Ta tanda de ge ngone tane tanda de la ya na ri ngombu sto de kare chonggo re sena densin so so na la ya ani jing zu shi jin yi ge ta nga chu pi che ge changbor chi wa changbor chi chong de chog dus.
Which is very important information for a research project to know the sample size or number of observations.
Ta shinji jin chi ba ina ani ko la ji kar so de pi che ge chi chong chi go ran zu shi jin yi ge ka chang chi wa te ka chu yemen de mi gwa ha chu ge chang bi chag res.
But one problem for somebody looking at your graph is when they see these blue bars and they see minutes of sleep during the day on the y-axis, they are going to assume that the blue bars are actually representing minutes of sleep.
Ina yang sro tanda gi dinner do gi peji gangla thiri gangla ya ani nar dinner do ton stambala ya ton de ani tanda digi shontu gangla lapar to ni nimu ni kubi kapsa kama katsu chile ni kusha se titang yo ra tis stambala ya ani digi nar ngombo tele tabaina digi ngone tane ni marla ya ni krama katsu la ni kusha se ti chongdu samgris de tabaina.
So whoever has the laptop near them in group 3, why don't you go ahead and edit the chart and let's remove the count of minutes of sleep data.
Tanda dene ne lola ramla yuni gi ti karsa tanda karsa ti kama kasula ni kusha se gi ti ngombu chi on to o ti ne representatives.
So to do that, if you go to the top right corner of your graph, you can click on those 3 dots. Perfect. So now we have happiness felt over the past 2 weeks and minutes of sleep during the day. Go ahead, Dawa.
Tata shasta nga so kari do senarwa ani ani ku ani mu ga ni ku ate kama ka so shi ku sa te ta ani devi gi to tani ran la ya kilo ka so so son se te ni tata ri dusta.
So one challenge of Google is it decided to put on the x-axis a little and then a lot and then not at all.
Tanda karso kore de tanda Google gi te gang le ta thone zo chi gorwa te gi yan chi kang chi kar tu le stambala ko ge driyon stambala ya ne ola chi do wa chon sam chon son se ne mampo chon son sa ne chon ma son se pa dus driyon dus.
So what is confusing for the people you're showing these data to about that order?
Tanda gi panum tira do chi do bai bai na ne tani te lai te sungu nyo bo do thongres.
Which of these 3 represents the least happiness?
Tanda de na ne ro chu ta kipu ta nyon shu so de de na ne thir kang gi chong do.
I think the last one.
Yeah, and which is the middle amount of happiness?
Middle one is the second one.
Well, if I was gonna put these in order of I have a middle amount of happiness versus a lot or a little, which one goes in the middle?
A little amount of happiness.
A little amount, right?
Yeah.
But it's not in the middle of these 3.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna show you one way. I think in Google, it's a bit hard to fix it here. So I'm gonna show you how we can make a graph that puts them in an order that you want.
Tanda de ba na ro tro de kare se na ku pang de tan te chong cham mang po za ne chong ma so se pang do su sha do ta de ba na pang de tan te ngu nyo ku yo res chi tang ba na nga chu ge de chin ding sam so so chong cham so se de ki ma la le gro chong cham so so ani za ne chom so se de ku chong chi la le gre ani mang po so so se de chong chen da chi la le gro pang de tan te tu le gro ko ta za ne chong ma so chong so mang po chong so se de pang do su ti gro ya na Mampo Johnson, Johnson, Tawani Johnson, Bantu Stigrama Topi, Johnson, and Mampo Johnson, Johnson, say, Pandy, this Rio Marestin, Tambalaya, Natsula Gueg, Yamlet, this said, Candes, the Panti, Nuani, Mawala Candaresha, Yana Mani, Nua Candaresha, Pandy Tantilaya, and it does Tangians, Chichina, Tanda Google on the Tato, those who at the Chitang and Gonyo Parachi or Tandangasu, the George Tantum, the Tagians.
So I am going to copy these data.
That they get onto the teachings, copy chickens, partial chickens.
And I'm going to paste the values only.
The all I value only is what they get chamber that they cook process you put the past zero cheese.
Shorter. And this is because I can now change the order of these.
That and then also I say is not the cook a pound the country or what you are on the forest.
I'm going to go for a lot. So now we have a little in the middle.
Ta tanda la nga chong song sa de tanda ta nga chu tang tu ku kima la doa.
So let's see. One way we can do this, I think, is we can now edit this chart.
Ta tanda ge shenda zu tap chi ka re se na tanda ge de la yo chu ge teach doa teach the chart chi doa de theory chi doa de yang zu chi ja ge sa ge dam ka chi go te dam bai na.
And where we're taking the data here, right now we're taking it from here, we're going to take these data instead.
Ta tanda nga chu data ko ne la yin se na tang dinner dam bai na agang ge te ne la ju tang doa ta tanda nga chu ge shenda yo ko te ne la ju tang go res.
So on the x-axis,
J'en traité.
Oops, sorry. I'm going to pick these.
J'en traité ne toujours ça chi mambo chong zon ma chong sa sto ti to dam kro. Check.
Did it work? That did not work. Robin, does this always happen when you teach?
Never.
Good dance.
That's a joke.
All right, what did I do wrong? I'm just going to make a new one. Okay.
Shows the benefit of having copies.
Yes, I should not have done that. Okay, we're going to make a new graph. We want to column charts. On our x-axis, we want these. That's right. And here we want these. Ta-da! So now we have a little in the middle. So the main thing to remember here is you want to make the graph as simple as possible for the people that you're showing it to understand. And so making sure that, for example, your order on the x-axis makes sense is very helpful for the person looking at your data. Thank you, group 3. Let's go on to another group. And I'm going to pick group 7.
Hello.
Hello. Did you use the practice survey?
Yes, we did a little bit. Actually, our sheet is named as Group 7.
Okay.
So in the practice survey, we created a group sheet named Group 7. In that, we try to extract some of the result from our survey. So we took two variables, which is how refreshed do you feel when you wake up that morning, against the how many hours of sleep you had last night. So we tried to find the relationship between these two using a pivot table.
Okay.
And we got a table like this. Can you check out in our group folder? There is a practice survey. Under practice survey, there is a sheet named Group 7, so you can share that with the whole class.
Does everybody see it?
And I'm gonna use it sorry.
Oh, yeah. That is the one. Yeah.
Okay. So, oops. Okay, so we have here, what is this? A little bit no.
The no, from our survey, we have options. For example, like how refreshed do you feel? Some people say they feel a little bit of relaxed and refreshed. Some people say they don't feel any like refreshed or anything. They feel very boring or something like that. So we got a data like that. So
oh, this is an excellent example. So this was Dawa, can you translate this so everybody understands? My understanding is that this is a survey question where people could type in anything they wanted. Is that true?
No.
Like options.
They had options. Okay.
Yeah, we made an option like that. We gave options. In the options, the option listed will be like little bit or very refreshed or no or yes. So these are the options we gave, and then they choose one from them.
Okay, and this is how many hours they slept.
Yes.
Okay, so then let's see here. So can you walk us through this graph?
So actually what we did is while we were pivoting this table, what we did is like in the row we have chosen a question about how refreshed you felt the next morning. So that was kept as a row. And for the column, we actually kept how many hours of sleep the person got when they woke up that morning. So in the values, we actually try to count the number of response for each options for that that morning, whether they feel how many of little bit response we got. Like we try to find out the frequencies. And then we also try to find out, these are the frequency that we got, and we try to tabulate that with the chart by tapping on the insert. So I don't know how to explain that.
So Dawa, can you translate this? So here we have in the rows, the 4 choices in terms of how refreshed you feel.
Do I need to go all over from the beginning? Maybe, yeah. And then because it did new general location say teach and Jutanchi and the data and each around the Dena Katsuchon song said that Petitele Chach or Rosopa or take it to a take Parug and Jawat sayings. And take it like this Tambalaya, Kusidena Katsuchon song said, take up Sukus Damka Kashishadorwa. And then they taught some Johnsons, then a pay Johnsons, and then do Jomasons, and then do Johnson said, or what the chair, and it tell I uncle Damka Yon Shenda Yan Chitsu Kazuchila in business, so she knew 2 but Yen to Niche but the Yen said, or data any Koga Damka Tisha data, and Rere Laya, and it Kulanjani, Tamportica Sokatsuchon said, the Tata, dus remove up the Dinazuchi de Chris Papa Yins. Those reasons, Tanita, and Gelaswell, and the Dinane, Natsuge, kathi rwa kathi tampo tinona yo pati kapsa ani toa de la ya shopa merilong ta shopa ya lang sta bala dina kasu chindu se de la ya dankamando shidus. Yes.
And instead of having amount of hours of sleep as a continuous variable, they have it as a categorical variable.
Tata de la ya ani chesu de kapsa karioresena ani ni jirong kuson se de la ya de kapsin bana nga chu jun to bigi jutang ginamba ti jan dwa shini tu ni jes sa dwa de mai ba chi kariona degree na yang nga chu ge dinseng ge tambor chi gorwa dinseng yu chi ge tambor tin shana degrees.
So of the 13 people who said that they were a little bit refreshed, 4 got 4 to 6 hours of sleep and 9 got 6 to 8 hours of sleep.
Ta de shopayan stambala ya de na tosam chong se de ro te na ne ani te len dani na ne ani ko so shini tu pat ni rani te mi shigalan ja shas so tu ni je la ya ni ra son se te mi google and ja shas.
So if we look at the graph, we can see that here on the y-axis, we have the number of people who fell into each category.
Ta tanda de kapsa nga chu ge jong te gang la kare tont crisis tambale densen susu na na yue pi densen susu la len chunyu kusula karsugre chue ro da chu mando densen mando ani do atena la ya mi ka chu chila ni tin do ra do ti chong tont dus.
And we can see that of the people who reported being feeling a little bit refreshed and energetic, the majority of them got 6 to 8 hours of sleep.
Hanta de na to sam chong song sa churwa te na ne ani manchi shila ya manchi shi ge ani te ko sula tuni jegi ni tira shaswa de na ne ko ni gusla ra do.
Now I'm going to show you one alternative of how it might be easier to show these data so that your viewer can understand the differences between the groups.
Ta tanda de kas yande ko karsugre da chi loni de la ya cherang de na la ya kari chi song ye te tab du gong ne ko ya she to wan de kana do chi song du sa de chon thar jenda chi mo chi yes.
Because what you're interested in these 4 groups on the x-axis is the proportion that maybe got more sleep rather than less sleep.
Ta chi chine tunon chong ade ro tanda de gang la yo pe gi karsugre da tanda ge jong di theti gang la yo pe gi densen de ta na la ya jacha su pai ba na ro jacha su pai ba na yang na durse ngu gong la ko pai ba na kangi chi la ni ma ra sha kangi chi la ni nwa ra sha se ti ge durse ti ha ku ni dun ho res.
So instead of using a column chart, which we also call a bar graph, you could try a stacked column chart.
Ta tanda nga chu ge nari chi ro nari de ge sabla ya ani nari chagba de do chi pe ta na degrees.
So now we can sort of more easily compare the size of the red versus the size of the blue within a group.
Ta tanda de ka semba nga chu ge chi dinchen chita ba chikna na yu chu ge ani ko tanda de ge ta choncha mar bo tang choncha ngombu ni ge paru ge de chese go ra da ko ni chi chung ge chi de chese go ra te ani li lo ko ne tong dus.
So here on the y-axis, we still have the number of people that reported a particular category.
Ta tanda de ge jong te ga na ta no ba na nga so ro dinchen su su na la ya len ja ni mi tambor ka chu chung du de tan do chen de yes.
And this is helpful because we can tell really very few people said, no, I didn't feel refreshed or energetic.
That de ka na pen to pe ores ka chila na mi pe nyong shi chi ke ro ani chi de chone chong kar su re ta chi de na ti chone choma song sa chi do te len ja ni mi nyong ba de tont class.
But it's still, that makes it a little bit hard to compare the differences between the 4 groups.
Tando tina imba na ya nga so karsana densin shi ga paro la ya ade kata ro chi chepa kare chi do sa ti dra tando imba na kala kapus.
So we can instead choose this one, which is called a 100% stacked column chart.
That the deal yang also shenda kare sana din ona ko te energy sama imba kansela yang ko energy sama te jachangu pa bya chi wa tin sen chi wa.
And then we get this, which here, this is the percentage of people out of all the people total that said they slept 6 to 8 hours of sleep versus 4 to 6 hours of sleep within a group.
That and the din ani kar sana din sen re na la ya ani kar sana ye chu tu ni je chu shin tu la ni ko te je ani len ja ni tin na ni ro yang ko kar sa len ja ni den sen tin na ni ani kar sa to sam chong song sa te gi na ni ya ani chu tu ni je ta chu shin ni je le im ba gi den sen so so la ja cha kar yo ba te an chon tu yo res.
Now, Robin, I'm going to call on you. If you were going to try to do anything else to this graph, what are some changes you might make?
Can we go to the table?
Yeah. And I'll try to make it a bit bigger too.
So one point that I have is the following.
Hada gelage te gen Robin la ke te cherang ta da de ge Thursday la yan jro chi tang go ke bai na jro kari tang sa res ro na gen Robin la ge tan da de la ya chi se she chi ni ni tan da kan chi yes.
So this highlights for me the importance of selecting your response options very carefully.
Ta de ge kari chung do se na chorang ge chi dam ka mang bi chwa in stam ba la ya dam si chi ge ta ga so la dam ka kha chi chi sha gar wa dam ka te tembe chi stam ba la ya zabra chi gu yo pa te ke chim bu im bi ge ni te thong dos.
Because you can see there's very few people who are in the very or no cell. There's only one person who said very and only one person who said no.
Ta da de ka serwa ani dina pe dina chong song se ta choni chong ma song se de ge len ja nya ha chong nyong re dos.
And the reason for that is I think there's some redundancy between no and a little and very and yes.
Ta de ka re se na ro ko jing gu nyo pu su ko wa da tan da ta chong song se te ta yes se te ta ani tan da de la ka su re da pe dino chong song se te ni ga paro la ya chapter this jamat ka do ta ani chong ma song se te ta tok sam chong song se ti ga paro la ya ji yang ko chapter jamat ka gu ju thom ya chi go wa o ti ga ne tan te chong res.
If I was designing these response options from the start, I might have said none, a little, a lot, and just had those three categories.
Ta ke ti nga ra la ya ti do chi ki drug dam ka do chi te chi bai bai na ani tang pu ti chone chong ma chong ni wa te la ya ti chong song ne sam ba te le ma bu chong song se ge dam ka sam rong sum sha sa res.
But we don't have the ability to do that. So what I might do now is actually combine the very and yes and the no and a little bit so that there's just two categories and we have more people in each of those cells.
Ta tanda te chong yo ma res ka chila na nga su ta dam ka te chen che ko chen de chi len jab sa ro din stam bala ta tanda kan de chi sa re se na ani ko ni da ko cho de chi sa res ro nyam te sha sa res pi sha ba na ni du ta ani to sam ka sa pe din chong song sa ta yes tin sha nyam te dom ani ka so re to sam chong song sa de ta chon chong ma song sa dan de knowledge to 어떤 이샤 냠트 루카치라 루사레스 딘스tambal라 타마텔라 양아 줄다 딘센이 샤그도가 렌티 담카마스나텔라 딘센이 샤그도가.
Yes, very.
Does that make sense, Nicole?
Yes. So I agree with Robin that this, you could make a new graph that now would just have 2 stacked bars, one for no a little and one for yes very.
Ta da imbana nga su de la ya ro ta energy ti tsama de yang che chi zu yin su ro de ka sa nga su la ani ka su re ta din chen ni che ani chong ma song sa ta tis chong song sa ten cha din chi la sha ani chong song sa ta ma bo chong song sa chi ro wa
I just did this by hand because then we had this table, so it was very easy for know a little to go here and count 0 plus the 4 and make a new table. And the fact is a lot of time when scientists collect data, unexpected things happen, particularly when you are working with humans. So yesterday we talked a bit about you might need to remove some data. We had an example of Robin forgot to do what he was supposed to do.
Robin lagi kuna drip guya gi tondo chiko yorda ina te driyo marwa te drimes tamba te tantu meza then te tantu rimune chlo tongo ke yores.
But based on getting survey data, you may after the fact realize that it would be quite difficult to tell the difference. Should I answer yes, or yes, I am energetic, or I am very energetic? And so then we combine those two.
Yang san samla ro len jabi kapse damka chi karsakreta chi nibati zupugantli chi nishiyo chido chogudu sato tan shipe mangpu yochido chogudu satela doge na chi karsakreta te damka tingu nyopondo yo kapse ngaso tena doge damka ni te nyamte daditang res.
And this is why when Jenny came and talked about her research, they gave surveys to participants, and then they've gone through this interview process to understand how they are interpreting the question.
Ta gen Jenny like mug shinji tan devi gi korla tamsiti no bi kapsirwa ani atandagi chechup gi toa khachi mela ya lenja chu ani ti jela ya ni me lenja ne khosola ya toa tang de tirwa ani toa de la ya chang ko kandas like do se ge toa de tang yoris.
Are there any questions about that?
Ti kola toa ayos.
Hello?
No, okay. So I just want to remind you of a few things.
Nicole, I think she was gonna ask a
sorry.
question.
I thought you said no, not hello. Sorry. Go
It's
ahead.
okay. I have a question about the survey because in our group we have 5 participants, so we kind of have an in-between group, like kind of design. So what we did is like within our group, we divided the group as meditating and non-meditator. So surveys are collected each day. So do we have to consider each survey as a separate person, or do we have to segregate manually the person, like code for instead of using our name, we have just kept like enrollment code for each person. So do we have to manually segregate meditating group against not meditating group, or is there like a command key or something to do it easier with the Excel sheet?
Let's go back. Is this your survey?
Yeah. This is like only a bit of our data.
Oh, okay.
So I will share our group survey. Wait a second. Timare ticha mashumar. Tire. Timara. I think it might take some time, so maybe.
Okay. So I think there's a number of questions in here. So the challenge of our studies is that our sample sizes are quite small. You want to translate that?
The Shakasa. Still in the record number to cook a turtle and cheese tambalaya kusuge and non in the switching it didn't send you like chair, what didn't send you like it there. And it gom jani gro kachi tan gom jani gro kachi la din sala che ane ko nima mampu rang la ya ni ko ge tang tu tu de chi yor wa ti de chi stam la ya ane gom jani gro ka tan gom jani gro khas le ko din sne inje chi gu yor wa din sne inje de che la ya ne chi tab du lo kan ro chi yor es ra ya mana ko ge min ti ma tro che yang ko la ya min gi sau la ya yang chi tang ka ro chi chi sha sha na de ro ya yang na tanda nga su ta tang thu ge remove di tanda google ti pe chi tang kap serwa in de na la ya na chi tab diu din da me nga din da ro a tu zu ko ui chi che te tab dia ge ani me nga din da ro yo res ke che so ta sta ba land la ya ani tanda de la nga su la chi ya chi kar yo res na chitang ge tanda nga su ge de ge ta sim ji ge de tribi ge kap se nga su ge tang thu de len sa ta ta to pa nga su ge 심지 지사기 지금 미기 담볼 치고 왔다. 어때 파티스나 가서 비체기 지총 치고 왔대 하정 강라강선 총총레스.
So in many of our experiments, we might have 5 or 6 participants, and each of those is sort of collecting data over 3 days.
다 만치시 말아가서 지금 딘진치랜즈시 지니밍아도 두도제 아니 그 속에 양 장토대 양 지금 니만이 숨기랑 라야 되는 제한테 중요해서.
So in a larger experiment, we would probably, in many cases, take all the data from each individual person and consider that as a sample.
다 que ya judge hambu ria simji tena do chi imbaina ro ta karsan mi chi ke gane driva ge ani chi karsu gore de chi ro lanju ga tang tu chi ro o te ni piche chi long ji gres.
Because if we ask Robin how long he slept on days 1, 2, and 3, those are not independent data points because they're all from Robin. And we can imagine that maybe Robin is just a very good sleeper or a very bad sleeper.
Ta picha japana Robin ge ani kuya ge ji tangtu de ruchi ba na nima tampo nyas bala ruchi ba na teta ani nga chu ti mares wa ko ta karso gore tu me independence goro ata tu me ge ju chi ro mares te me chi ga gan lan ju ge ani ko tangtu ro me chi ga gan lan ju ko tangtu yin cha ani tangtu de la ten de tan ko yang chi ni ku ya go chi sha ya go chi rim du ko ni ya go ra gum du setting a sung ji je re ti tambala ne ko chi tu me ge
But if we look at this example here, where we're asking people whether they felt a little peaceful or a lot peaceful and their average hours of sleep, we're just considering each of those points independently, even if 4 of those data points are from Robin. 3 of those data points are from Robin.
다 단다디 가시베랑 아수카리 치오레스네 지 시디 가츠 소송세 치거와 디 소송 망포 소송세 데이터 게 값에 그냥 아술라 라야 게 장토 데이터 아니 지 레레레레라 지요레스와 지요르데 이메나 단다 디그나네 아니 지 가서 장토 숨스 아니 로빈스 아니 또 지 장토 텐데레스.
We're also treating all of these data points the same, even if it was collected on day 1, 2, or 3 of the experiment.
Tim sepi ngasu ke tangtu te ta chama ani chi chipa chi la chi ores ro tangtu di druchi bi kapsa ngasu ni ma tampo nyo sambas ni ma mando druchi ro imba ne tin ajin yang ko iwa chi de ta pechu tang yo ma te ta chama chipa chi la ngunju chi de ton de la ya pechu tang yo res.
And for now, I think that is the best approach because these are sort of preliminary or initial experiments, and so we're trying to look for broad patterns.
Da tanda imbana ngasu thamen te yakshin ro insares ro ti kalana chitu gi imbana jeshi dubi kapsro ani chi jeshi mandu ga ngondu gi do chi yor wa da o ti gi ti stambala ya tampo de la ngasu karita go re sena chi ko ge dream asna ro chapse ti chi chap chambu go ngula ta go res.
So for most of your groups, my suggestion for this particular experiment is that you don't worry about who the data is from or for the experiments, what day it was collected.
Tanda ge nga su ge ji simji chi ni tanda ge kapsro wa ani che 장투티 수그 산에 용당 장투티 같이 들으지레스 니마 관계를 들으지레스 티콜라야 치수 삼체 만원은 되겠어.
But I will show you one example later this evening if we did want to split things up by days and participants.
딱 게팅가 수그로와 아니 다치 장투대로와 니마 만도와 종위기 내땅땅야나 아니 지금 주시진크 만도와 산에 용위 시샤데디 아니 게티 카카도 진이 조바인바이나 네 대단 제외게 배춘직들은 공단도 스무트지긴스.
I just have one point on that, Nicole.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think this raises a good point, two good points. One is that there's many ways to analyze the same or to kind of present graphically the same data.
다단데 되게 그 네트마스나 니 네트니 모토치도 스치드가라나 가솔라야 장투 깡치요 바인바나로 장투게 다 깡치요 바인바나 장투티 다치 들응고니 전야라야 전탑디 망보요 바데 가솔라야 모토치도.
And that the approach that you take in part or largely depends on the question that you're trying to answer.
다 디캅스 저런게 지금 디 촌탑디 간다로치 지긴 디 지긴 사야 되게 지금 남같이 얘기 모디 간다스 드로만로사야 디 조데로와 아니 저런게 당보데라야 아니 조아카리치 당 서고라 조아카리치 당 조아딜라 랭 간다로치 자긴 사야 지고와 어때다니 그 조시 첨부차고.
So looking at the data, looking at multiple measurements or multiple data points within each of your people or each of your participants can be very powerful if you're interested in the time course of the outcome, the effect of something over time, and you think it may kind of affect the trajectory of people's data over time.
딱 게티 저런 거와 미치스 월단 주식진이 지니 종위게 장토데라야 저런 게 신주진이 도바인바이나로 데라 테네데 신주진이 도바이나 데 문에 거스 그 누가 첨부 수지 차게 됐어 신주데 데 갈라나 미직간의 장토들을 지와데 아니 뒤초에 랑부그랑라로 준림부그랑라야 아니 그 장토들을 장토들을 지와라 테네데 단에 되게 지금 내tan 간다로치 차가도 음도 사지거로 왔대 뒤랑부그랑라 집값 많이 받지 뒤랑부그랑라야 아니 장토데던 데비기 이시치바인 바나고 가서도 수참보다 그 냉가체 때문에 차게 됐어.
But I agree with Nicole that for purposes of this project, it's simpler and more straightforward to just look at everyone kind of grouped together. But just know that moving forward, we may want to think about the effect of, say, meditation over time. And in those, for those types of analyses, you know, in larger projects down the road, these kind of time course graphs could be very useful.
다 단다기 디 값으로 again 니콜라가 송반하신데 가서게 지금 다지 장토대 참마 이게 다 미스산의 용돈 뜻속까지를 내면서 되게 지금 인제티 담하고 답디고 간다 두스나선에 되기도 와다 다 지망 가서게 디 메터드 지침바인 바이나 아니 사버도 아니 가서 그래다 사버도 단단가 수고 검드지발라테네 데타 아니 지 깊은 간다로 지도세 되나 로간라야 지 냠시지바이나다 미치간라 지금 준 정보간라다 지 뜻의 정보간라야 냠시티 두고요와 어 딘단도 값스 양아 속에 지금 미치기 뜻 만다와 좀 이게 장토 데이터 아니 그 가서 그래다 로갈로간로 지스데데 내가 속에 인코 디 트르나 법 담발이야 그 저 general 차비하기 들지 바베치도가 계속 아주 스탠서 딘달로게 네탄텔라야 내가 저 돈을 지고래 돼 가서 가서 그래다 마음발라야 가서 다시 지금 general 볼 데비아타 다시 이제 전부 드피캅스 데이터라야 돈을 주고 요레스.
And with that, did that answer your question?
저런 거 좋아라 렌테서 해서.
Yes.
Okay.
Very much. Thank you so much.
Let's have at least one more group show us a graph, because I think this is a very helpful way to sort of think about different approaches.
That
How about group one?
that and then banner what thing also like Canada Chesha the Cursa theoretic and pops at into stop by banning as so Curso then they found the Ratrella and to put having Chireshas, what is Tamalaya, the young Chero Kachilatarians, and the Ruka Tampo Gajilatarians.
So group one, did you also work on the practice survey this morning?
Yes, ma'am. We took our data from practice survey and we had taken 2 variables from there and we had plotted
Google is thinking. Okay. And which sheet is your table?
ma'am, group 1 snow line.
So what is the question that you looked at?
Yeah, ma'am, we actually looked at the quality of sleep in the actual average quality of sleep and we compared with it with the happiness.
Okay. So here, is this a little reporting being a little happy and a lot happy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And actually we made a bar graph, but I felt like going for this comparison analysis would be good. So we just had a result like there's a very small negative correlation because looking at the graph we can see that a person or an individual with a long hour of sleep actually he has actually, ma'am, we actually had a negative correlation because from this graph we can see that a person who is having a little amount of sleep, actually he is having, happiness. He's having happy emotions. Whereas who is sleeping for a less hour of sleep, he's having a lot of happiness. So like we just took out through the data and then we could get this small negative correlation.
Okay. So you chose to sort of make a line graph instead of a bar graph.
Yes, ma'am. Because bar graph, if we do some analysis, if we make a plot bar graph, we cannot actually make much difference, ma'am, because it's almost same. So I thought like going for this inclined one, it would at least serve the purpose.
Okay. So I would say that typically, oftentimes for a line graph on your x-axis, you have a continuous variable. Do you want to translate that, Dawa?
Yes. Tada de ruka tampu kusugi chuati kari system balaya new kuyagi ta new pikas na new general lo kusha sayate ta ane ko kilo kasu chosa sayate jiga chuati ni ko paro la yan jaw karin duati jiga taba yins ta tanda de kapsu kusugi thir peche tamba yins thir ta techi tension do de peche tangu no jinsen karin system balaya tanda kusugi takshe diga kapsu Jambila taba imbayna jiga ni mampu kya tanga jiga dichi mampu sayati ni parola ya rwa ni tan dikki sayati ni parola ya nga soge tuende te topi ke tuende tes chidus dis tambala ya di chaya ke chete thidi peche tamba ins tati nga su nar ti percho tushi narmu wa ti peche matang yo go jinsen kare insena ani narrate peche tamba imbayna kurani la ya kepreshira shita madus ndi chent ko madus ta tanda de imbayna ko so tinde topic this you but chaya ke cheto ani thide peche tamba ins ti sonsa den tamba da tanda girage soide ta tanda de kapsa chirge imbayna ro nga so ge ta de thiki thir peche tang thit peche tang de tang ge ani chamber che de kapsa imbayna nga chula ya ne thethi ora thethi x axis ga la thethi ga la yu chu ge 아니 가서 그랬다 지금 주장 주치치 어와데 준투픽인 주치치 구요 레스와 지기지라 지금 메트도 요픽이 주장 주고요 레스. Yes.
So while somebody saying that they're a little happy is less amount of happiness than a lot happy, we really have a categorical variable here and not a continuous variable.
다 단어의 값이 기포티 티스 소송사다 만보 절송사데 계제시험 담발아야 가술라야 티스타 만보 세비 값은 가술라 예바데 가르나 딘생게 버스치레스 딘센레치샤로 티스티도 만보스도세 딘센치샤요레스 티스타발아야 주치데 주탄테 딘생게 주탄레스 아니티 그 미트피 준트피 주탄 마레스.
So I would say that most researchers here, while it's hard to see the differences between the bars, would still use a bar graph rather than a line graph here.
나랑 그 다스인 바나 신주가 망치시게 그런 게 챕터에 따라 너를 배쳤던 바나 챕터시라도 통하다 갖고 레그를 두다 이나야 아니 글 배쳤던 알레 아니 단다데 틀리 배쳤던 알레 아니 너를 배쳤던 드레스.
There is one way that we can try to show the differences between the bars a little more clearly for the viewer.
단다데랑 가지고 챕터에 때니 두고 요래 챕터에 때라야 아니 가지고 단도이나야 데라야 가서 그랬다 너를 배쳤던 데다 그런 일 챕터 티스티 요파티 도야 답고 요레스.
And I'm going to show you that, but then we're also going to talk a little bit about why maybe it's not the best choice.
Tanda the Canada you Batirwa Tanda Yang Tengi is in a young day young chick person that Dam Kando Yashindo member in a series.
Nicole, while you're setting that up, can I just make a point or two?
Yes.
So just a couple points here. So the first is this is a good example of how both sleep or happiness would work well on the x-axis. So it's kind of how you want to frame what the viewer is looking at.
The tetik gangla x-axis gangla tetik gangla ya ani 지금 ni kuyaga chucheta ani dischchoyaga chechgorwa ta ni chaya ko tetik gangla pamna chojoga ya pichni yago chires ta de zudi karsena chorange 지금 lokpa potela ya khasebu gana ganda chmutu chimensa chgorwa tela raligres.
So another very reasonable way to graph this would be where you have sleep on the x-axis. And then actually sleep is a continuous variable. So maybe it is okay to do it the way you did it, but it just, you can graph things in different ways, just depending on what you want to bring the attention to of the viewer.
당봉이 이와 니샤디스가 왔대 관계지 x-axis 강라 해바이나 디그도 사지고로 왔대시로 다다데라야 양아 쪽에 가사 저런게 지 lokpaputi 지다 가서 그랬다 도난tin 제약이 제대로 lokpaputi 도난tin 제약 센스담발아야 라트로티 약부지에 제도 라트로티 약부지 퇴약이 제도 아니 지금 속에 태트던 정특 강라야 가리 주마 주세주와 담카치아주와 어디티라 시샤데다 담카치는 디그레스.
But the bigger point I want to make is that the goal of science is not to just find an effect, but to report reality as best as we can as it is.
다 천리기 거기 지금 냠랭기 다 지금 돈도케 치시대 지금 대화스고 어떤 대화 지금 인증민지 연애 수신지 인증지 저거가 되라고 말했어. 때 천리기 거기에다 지금 무기도 깨치시지 갈라나 지금 랑싱게 가리 임바와 가리 임바데 아니 지금 가리 녀바데 아니 카세우당 답듀가니 아니 팔라요 무트시아치고와 아니 팔라요 첨벌지와지와 데레스.
So it's totally okay if you don't find any differences between your groups in your study or relationships between the variables you're examining, because science advances as much by not finding effects as it does by finding effects.
다이 게티 저런 게 지금 심지지하게 된cen이 당한 양나 단다게 가서 그랬다 되게 바로라연 주천이가 바로라연 제와 당 수신 당 지거와 내던 데다 많이 바인바나 이나 그런 게 캐피탈 하전 천천히 바이나야 데라야 시다 중요 말이스와 내가 저기 천리티 예제도야 지거와 천리 예제도야데 아니 데다 도겐 제와 많이 팔라테니 마중요 레스와 따티 관계 도들바이는 저 요파테 녀발레 저 요파테 녀발레 저 메파테 녀파 서고로다 저 메주가 내탄틀라텐데 니 천리티 예제 마치요 레스.
So if you're not seeing any differences between your groups visually or statistically, that's totally okay. In some respects, that's really interesting because we've now learned something, which is that there is no difference, and that can then inform future research and future questions.
다티나도 여바인바나 단다 제주가 심지가 가서와 지 챕터 메파탄 드라 메파탄다도 지가 tindaduwa nyepa imbana tela chunyo mati tatara dikuyores tigiwa tela tene detirwa tela tene deti ani karsugureta maungpagi ko shimjig tang tindaduwa ya ko ge karsugureta chi lamka tendo tang yana chi maungpagi shimjig tela ye shi shasa ge chi ne do cha chorwa o tindaduwa cha ge riwati yores.
Cool.
And to follow up on that, when I teach undergraduate students at Emory, they often will at first think that their experiment failed if they did not find a difference.
Tandairwa ji asuge turumlota tanda ramjam batizlan zinda tipi kaps kusuge tambo de kusu kwa kare tlang du sestambalaya ani keti ji kepertan joti sigorata ti manye pickups kare chogore sestambalaya ani tose simjiti ani ji tindri masamba rochla sigdus.
But many good experiments do not find a difference between groups.
Ina yang ro tanda jiga ta tose simji ya putinda mambo chiknalaya nei ku dinsin mandan ji parola ya kepertan jiga jawati yang ni kumaris.
So a graduate student in my lab right now, who is working on her PhD, has been spending 5 years collecting extensive data that shows that there's no difference between the groups she's been studying.
심지가 나니 단다 람바게 톱트인다 도게 네고 답에테 장투데베도 그러다 수천보간에 들을지 배수 첩보간에 들을지 루엉알라 도시 심지지지 장투들을지 바이나야 아니 딘슨 스거다로 카탄 딘슨 바로라야 네 챕터메 바탄 조메 바가 장투들 니요레스.
And that has taught us something new about the evolution of the species that she is studying.
다 되게 가서 가르탱도 세나 뭐게 톱종 제사게 아니 지 니르게 콜랄 톱종 제사 되게 콜랄와 아니 지가 가서 그랬다 티탄 드레비게 아니 지 셰샤탄 리니테 사와칭가 솔라야 코토탄라 투치용도스.
So going back to this graph, there are some ways that we can try to sort of zoom in or focus in on sort of the slight differences between these bars.
단단한 수게 들이들었다 바인바나 단단 너르 대기 캐프티시오 바데양 아수치가 가서 그러다 지 캐프티시오 바데 아니고 가서 그러다 자도 지시로지 당지 아니 통대우도 당 원수도 프로저요레스.
So I'm going to select custom and then find the vertical axis, which is the y-axis.
That the customized what the teacher didn't y-axis that the
So right now we go from 0 hours of sleep to 8 hours of sleep on the y-axis. And Google just picked 8 because it was higher than the tops of these bars.
that and the Kasim Bena Google and Eco Shaja Kraji Damsharwa, take a lana Nasuge, nuclear gets to the Tamashin decisions number 2 in a dose number JT Titali Toy or what is number Kushaja Damjit in the rest.
But we, for example, can say, let's go from 0 to 7 instead. And then we sort of start to emphasize the tops of the bars a little bit more.
That under the Kasanga Sugar Yonta Telecon Monta Dumba the Ruba Bana, which separates you, but they cannot taste you so to us.
Now, another thing that we could do is instead of starting at 0, we can say, let's start at 5.
The Shendaching as Sutampo Lecon and go to my budget, and a Casagore. Anganing goods getting a degrees.
And this makes it look like, oh, look, these bars are very different.
And that didn't do Chicheva Imana, Alena, then Shepherd was hitting us the thing it was.
And at least in the United States, in newspapers, you will see graphs like this often.
Ari it's Haperganala, didn't do theoretic to Tongares.
But ultimately, the sort of most accepted way to make a bar graph would be to start at 0, because somebody could get no sleep at all that night.
That under the Kapsanga so Chirgi in Banarwa. Narrative trions Castle Yashit in Bana, Lecorni, Lecorni, Gutuna Yashuris. Cashlani Casilla, Yachuni, nuclear marriage in the Congress.
So we will start it at 0, but we will sort of make it at least a little bit lower at the top.
Also, Lecorno goods which Gangati and it is Mount Ochichi, Capratis to twice wins.
So I'm gonna sort of use this as an example to walk through a few other things that will be helpful when you do your presentations.
That under the picture on the Tirwa, the Jella Chetuga, Shimjik under with Tamshe Laya, Nature, Pentopu again, I don't know what you Motuchella picture means.
So this group already did a very good job making it so that the title at the top makes some sense.
That under the sending in Banaco, the theoretic Gola and Gojo Chitwa, or taking Uncle Taba and Banategi to Natunchi Motuchi, but some of those typically on our shots.
And there are different types of titles.
That other day Gojo in Bana, Gojo Layanko, and Dinsamas Nari Mando Mabuyores. So
here, we have average actual sleep in hours versus happiness.
That other day Carlana Carsogre, so a new Munich Soka Queens, Teta, and the Chin Chagaparo in the Rotten gig, Nitri Seshadus.
So the VS in English just represents versus, or this versus that.
That the VS just I did away in China puts my cars on date and the Durbaina about the Paranic Rotten. So
it quickly tells the person looking at the graph, I'm going to expect that this graph represents the relationship between two variables, in this case, hours of sleep and happiness.
Then those Tomwatch some what to go to start some Gadelaya and a Koge, Jutromas on the Jutan Niga Parog Drawatang to Swa, and then take up same banner, and a new get to sit down, and it change a Parog Drawatang upon the start and Hakudus.
Another way that you might put a title over a graph is to have a statement that says, this is the main message of this graph.
That's and that's a career Tambalaya, and it the gang and Gujutis Tambalaya, and it taken non liar, and a theory Juchi de Somberchia, Chutantamas, and Yimbuti Karimbas, take on Chayores.
So we could change this instead by changing the title to say there is little difference between the amount of sleep that those who are happy a lot get versus those who are happy a little.
Tanda Dirwa, Yananga Sundin Joratan de Careza Yores Tambalaya, and Ichi Casugre. digital ma sogudu se ta digital nyo sogudu se tinigi dinsinigi parola ya mila ya ni kuya gi ji jinrong la ni kusha se tiga parola ya ni gi tin la ya chapashiram dus chapatis mashim dus se tichna degrees kan la.
And this sort of statement can be very helpful in a presentation because it tells the people seeing the presentation, hey, listen to my words. This is the main thing that I'm telling you right now based on these data.
Ta tirero ge chi ko ge chinggujo de la ya chi ta tanda dodo de do triba imbana kare pent koresena chiranga tamshi chibi kapsa ani tamshi ni kusu ga tanda ge tande theory de thomba jamge ani ale ta the la ya ta kar desi jagoresena ta tamshi chini garwa tanda ngarang ge theory de juichi desi jani de ins desi jaga no dodo den de ins ta gala kur tamshi tensha yores.
In terms of presentations, sometimes you're going to want the words to look bigger, and you can do that by clicking on any of these and change the font size.
Da yang chansom che zu ge di chibi kapsero tamshi chibi kapsero ola yo chu ge chi da di chide na ro yang ko yi gi chi chong de che ton na ya go yo re tes tambala ya ko tab di ko me ta do ko.
And this is going to be particularly helpful for the presentations you give at the end of the week.
Da de ane tanda de ge tan tra de ge ma zanju ma hyang tamba chi zu ge shimji pen re tamshi nang go yo ro te kapse de pen to ko shi yo res.
And we're actually, I think we will come back to this example after break and talk a little bit about this example and a few others and thinking about sort of variation in your samples or how much each of the responses within a group differed from the other responses.
That under the roa and also person stand with Jela Yangshan also pitching data and a pitching Shendala Shisha de Tira Chirange and a Lenjani Dinson Mando Dinson Mando Nankula Yanku Keprakanda Ruchi do such or what Titala Yang Stagins.
Because that can start to help us think about whether this little difference here between a little and a lot and how much sleep they're getting is biologically meaningful or relevant.
But they got Congress and Naroa, Ni Mambo Rasha and Yon Chirasha said, then as we young Chinkam get tennis of by Bana Yonko, a chicken English and redo remdu such or what they think Kelaya Pengris.
I think with this, these have been some great examples. I think we should actually take a break now because when we come back, we're going to think about presentations and then we'll go a little bit more into making figures.
That and that does also percentage and the Tanshatic does young change Tambalani, Jelang also Persubreta, Tamshi Chivi Capsa Canada Richi Meta, and it Chitur Tantero Kandasungo Mechorwa or Titalaya, Paratina Kanadu Zugu Metitalaya, and it's often Jimatila as Stagins.
And thank you so much to our three groups who showed us your analyses this evening.
And Tanda Chetsugi Iship Kandado now you met Matula and those Tembatang Tunawalaya, ne Nankangar Lucas and Chela and Tuji Chase.
So we'll come back together in about 35 minutes.
Ne Kamasum Songa, Samsonalaya, Yachen Jayon.